Dudes and dudettes, welcome back. This is episode 126 of the podcast, The Anxious Truth. Thanks for coming by. Welcome to the show. Today, our topic is learning how to sit still. And I know that this is a thing that is terrifying to many of you. The idea of sitting still, sitting with your thoughts, not being busy, just being with your own body, being with your own thoughts, without distracting yourself. Learning how to sit still really, and confronting the fear of doing that, is really about learning how to do that without distracting yourself. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I know that this is a challenge for many, 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 many of you, because you have told me this over and over, and I am listening. So we're going to address that. Before we do, you know what I got to do. The book is called The Anxious Truth, a step-by-step guide to understanding and overcoming panic, anxiety, and agoraphobia. It is on Amazon and a bunch of other places, and I wrote it to be essentially a textbook on how to recover from your anxiety disorder. I set out to write what I hoped would be a useful tool. By all accounts, it is that. So if you would like a more detailed and logically ordered way to go through the things that you hear me say over and over and over, go check out the book. You will find it at theanxioustruth.com/recovery guide. Everything you need to know about it, including some samples and how to get it, is there. And if you have already read the book or are reading it and you are enjoying it and it is helping you, maybe take a minute and rate it and review it on Amazon. Would be a huge help. Okay, that out of the way. Look, we're under 2 minutes and I'm already getting to the topic. I'm pretty proud of myself. So let's talk about the idea of not being able to sit still. And for many people who are following the podcast and in the social media community, I know that this is a giant, giant problem. It's a huge challenge. For many of you, this is a bigger challenge than the getting out and doing things issue. And this challenge kind of exists for people across almost all the spectrums of the disorders that I'm talking about. So if panic disorder is your problem, if agoraphobia is your problem, if health anxiety is your problem, if OCD is your problem, this tends to be a common thread across all of those variants. The inability or unwillingness to just sit quietly and not distract yourself from your own thoughts, emotions, and the sensations in your body. But this is a valuable skill. We must learn to do that. On a practical standpoint, no human being can be up, about, running around, busy and distracted at every waking moment. That is a difficult and exhausting way to live. And we cannot find ways to fill every single moment and drown out every thought that we have. And my guess is that if you're listening to this, and this is a topic that is near and dear to you, you have been spending a tremendous amount of time and energy to try to engineer that life. And I've heard many of you say again and again and again, you know, it's not so much that I struggle with going to the supermarket or driving or taking my kids to school or going on vacation. My problem is being home. And I don't mean alone. I'm not talking about monophobia here, but I've heard many people who say I'm the opposite. My problem is if I have to be home and idle and I have nothing to do, things get really, really bad. And in the end, that's because when you are home, or wherever the base is for you, and idle, and you don't really have anything to fill your time, activities, engagements, tasks, distractions, in the end, when you don't have those things, you are just left with you and you. And you and you is terrifying to most people. Terrifying for a lot of people, anxiety or not. But for people who are dealing with anxiety disorders like the ones I am always addressing, that being confronted with themselves is even more challenging. Because in the end, we talk about the one fear. What are we afraid of? We are afraid of how we feel and what we think when we get anxious, afraid, and feel uncertainty and things of that nature. And since how we feel and what we think comes from us, it is us, when you learn to just sit down, sit still, be quiet, and just be with your own body and thoughts, you are confronting the source of the one fear. And that's difficult. I get that. I want to acknowledge how hard that is to do. And I just want to give a shout out to those of you who have just spent the last however many years of your life attempting to live a life that never involves moments like that. And I know some of you personally who have kind of lived that way. Where it's just a constant stream of like, what can I do to distract myself now? And I think in the end, what winds up happening too is people find really creative ways to do that. You do it with music, you do it with, Netflix, you do it with YouTube. Some people do it with books. Some people literally take meditation, which is like by definition, learning to sit quietly with yourself and turn that into a distraction. So I know people who have literally taken guided meditations and turned those into drowning out the thoughts. You know, they have to have some sort of guided meditation or white noise or nature sounds or music or a TV show or Netflix or YouTube or a book or company or whatever it is. Have to have that going, or else there's silence and I will hear my thoughts. So why do we have to learn to sit still? And I think for most people, even if this isn't your biggest problem, it is likely a problem. Those quiet moments where you're confronted with like, well, I just have to sit here with this anxiety, with this fear, with this uncertainty, with the sensations, with the thoughts that come with it. What if, ruminating, overthinking, all of those things, they all come into play and they all converge in those moments where we just sit quietly with ourselves. That is when we are confronted with all of those things in their full force. When we are not running around, we are not out, we are not trying to be active, we're not trying to drown it all out. It's all right there. It gets right up in our face, and that's a difficult time. So why do we have to learn to do that? I've heard people say like, but why do I have to learn to do that? You know, I'm living my life. I go to work, I go to school, I take care of my kids, I do the shopping, I do all the things, we go on vacation. I just can't bear to not be doing things. Well, again, because in the end, those things should be sources of pleasure. You should be doing things that you like to do because you like to do them, or they are productive. They are accomplishing things. You are taking care of yourself and your family. You should not be forced to do the things that you do in life, partially because if you don't do them, you will wind up in a really scary situation. That's not really an effective way to live. You know, that's engineering your way into a corner where now I have to find the next task to do, and heaven forbid I can't find it. I'm going to have a real problem here. So wouldn't it be better in the end? And if that isn't your problem, and if it isn't your primary problem, but it is a problem, we go after all of the problems here. On this journey, we go after all the problems. We don't solve part of an anxiety disorder. We solve all of the disorder to the best of our ability. When we leave segments untouched, you know, we build the dreaded acceptable bubble. Like I'm okay, I'm pretty good. I'm 99% recovered as long as I never quiet and alone with my thoughts. Well, that's not really 99% recovered. You know, if you're going to really look and be honest about that, that is not 99% recovered. That's not even 75% recovered, really, because we all have those moments before we fall asleep, when we wake up. There are moments in the day when we are alone with our thoughts and ourselves. Even if there are other people in the room, we're still alone with ourselves sometimes. So it is not practical to try to live a life where you try to avoid that situation at all costs all the time. For some people, they discover that this is a problem by accident. I've, encountered many, many people who are dealing with things like agoraphobia and panic disorder, and they work super hard to deal with those things, and they make tremendous amounts of progress only to discover, wait a minute here. Like, I'm getting so much better at my exposures. I'm getting better at driving. I'm getting better at this and that and the other. But when I come back home, the roof caves in on me. People really find that that is a revelation. They were not expecting that that was a big problem, because what's happening there is the one fear is unmasked. So it's like, yes, you face the fear in the supermarket or wherever, at the restaurant or school or the pickup line at school or whatever it is. You face the fear there. You face the one fear there. But, oh, no, when I got back home and it was quiet and it was just me, the one fear that I have now dedicated myself to facing, I forgot it was there. So people are sometimes surprised to find that, like, why am I suddenly like losing my shit when I get back home after my exposure if I have a down day? For some people, it becomes weather-based. In the winter, wherever winter is where you live, maybe we have more inclement weather and it's colder. Maybe you live in a snowy place, whatever it is. We're more likely to be less active because there's less things to do in the wintertime. It's really difficult for some people. Like a Sunday afternoon where there's no work and nothing to do can become a real torture chamber for some folks. And so why try to live a life that gets you around that? That's exhausting. It's exhausting. And it's not really the fulfilling life that you really deserve. Like, you deserve to have an absolutely 100% recovered full life. Like, you don't deserve to have a partial life, a partially recovered life. So that's why we have to learn to do this thing. It's why we have to learn to do this thing. As hard as it may be, we have to learn to do hard things so that we can learn in the end through the experience of doing the hard things that, like, oh, they weren't that hard in the end. You know, what seemed impossible turned out to be, well, not so much impossible. Who knew? Right? So that's why we have to do this. You could disagree and you could choose not to do it. That's entirely your call. But in my own opinion here, Like, we do not leave recovery stones unturned, because when we do, 9 times out of 10, we wind up down the road, whether it's 10 weeks or 10 years down the road, saying, I thought I was better. Why is it back? Because until you confront that one fear in all of its forms and all of its places, you're never truly free. Okay. So that's why. How do we do this? Okay, Drew, I get it. I'm going to have to learn to sit still and be quiet. How do I possibly do that? Well, let's give a little framework before we talk about the how, because, and you guys are going to, all of this stuff is going to be familiar. Just we're going to apply it within the context of, how do I learn to sit still and be inactive and be with my own thoughts and my own body and my own emotions? How do I learn to do that? Well, the first thing you have to realize is that those thoughts, if you're dealing with sensations when you sit down, then let's address that first. Let's do the physical stuff first. So a lot of people find that when they sit quietly, but if I go home and I just sit on the sofa and try and watch a movie, I can't. Well, why can't you? Because I could feel my heart then. I can feel my heart pounding in my chest. So some people want to be inactive so their heart doesn't beat quickly. But for some people, they're sitting there and they feel their heartbeat, and that triggers their anxiety. Or if I sit quietly, I wind up focusing on my breath, and then I feel like I can't breathe. Or if I sit quietly, it aggravates, whatever, a problem that I have with my back. I can't find a comfortable position. And then the pain triggers my health anxiety, and I'm off to the races. But in the end, the same thing applies. Just because you can feel your heartbeat doesn't make your heartbeat dangerous. Just because you think you can't breathe, or you become overly focused and overthink your breathing, doesn't mean you can't breathe. If you have an injury and it's hard to find a comfortable place when you sit, I understand that. And that's certainly unfortunate. I hope you find a way out of that. But, if you're dealing with real physical issues that cause discomfort in certain situations, then whether you had anxiety or not, you would have to learn to adapt to that, work around it, work it out, hopefully fix it with the aid of a doctor or whatever it is. So whether there's anxiety or not attached to those things, you'd have to deal with it. So there's nothing special about your anxiety symptoms just because you can feel them more when you stop running around, when you are inactive and you don't have anything distracting you. Suddenly you feel all those things that you're terrified of in your own body, and you start scanning. But the sitting down, sitting quietly, being inactive, that's not a special circumstance. You're just now going to feel the things that you're always running from. So it doesn't make the sensations or the symptoms actually dangerous, special, or need some sort of new special way to deal with it. I could deal with my heartbeat if I'm in the supermarket, but how do I deal with it on the sofa? Same exact way. Let it beat. So you're not going to hear anything new in terms of your physical symptoms when you sit quietly, or when you lay in bed at night before you go to sleep and it's quiet. There's nothing different there. You just have to experience those things that you are interpreting as dangerous. Let them happen. Do not jump out of bed and run around. I recently have seen some people who say that, it's a problem. And when they try to go to sleep, when they experience anxiety, I can't just lay there, I have to get up. And then they wind up in a cycle where they think that all they can do is get up and pace around the house and hope to get exhausted enough that they fall asleep. That's not okay. You're going to have to lay down and experience the symptoms of anxiety. At some point, you have to stop running from them. And the same rules apply. Instead of tensing, we relax. Instead of focusing on them, we focus on our breath or some other point. We let the experience happen, and we learn that even when we do not try to escape it, it's uncomfortable and you'll have fearful thoughts, but you'll wind up okay. So we approach it the same exact way. And just because it seems more intense when you're sitting still and quiet and not trying to distract yourself, yes, it will feel more intense. It is not more intense. You are just noticing it more because there's no distraction there. So that's how we deal with the physical sensations that come along with learning how to sit still and be quiet. So let's move on to the thoughts, because I think for most people, that is the harder part. Most people feel like, but if I just sit quietly, and this is the argument against meditation for many people, but I can't meditate. I won't do it, because if I do it, then I'll start thinking, and I can't think. I cannot allow myself to hear my thoughts. Well, why? Why? So, the idea of confronting fearful thoughts or experiencing fearful or intrusive thoughts, irrational thoughts fueled by irrational fear, what if, overthinking, over-worrying, ruminating, trying to predict the future, playing out worst-case scenarios in your head. Those are things that happen when we sit down and we be quiet and we sit still. And people seem to think that somehow or other the thoughts become more powerful in that circumstance. They're not. They're the same exact thoughts that they always are. So if you are, those are thoughts that disturb you and are causing you consternation and make you afraid, then what's the difference between that thought, the thought itself? What's the difference between that thought if you're sitting quietly and actually experiencing it and experiencing the discomfort it produces and getting up and getting off the sofa, running out, going for a run, putting your headphones on, calling a friend, watching a movie, something to drown it out? The thought is still the thought. You did not change the actual thought. You just sort of drowned it out. So did that magically save you from the thought? No, it saved you from having the experience of the thought. So it's super important to understand here that a thought is irrelevant. And I say this so many times, the thought is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. You don't like the experience that you have when you have those thoughts. That's what's going on there. You do not want to experience the thoughts. It's not the thought itself. And I'm going to point out that even holds true for certain intrusive thoughts that maybe even revolve around things like self-harm. Like, what if I snap and decide to hurt myself is a very common intrusive thought among people who have absolutely no intentions of doing that, who do not want to hurt themselves. But self-harm is a common thing. But that seems like such an incredibly disturbing thought that you do not want to possibly allow yourself to experience it. But in the end, that thought is irrelevant, just like every other thought. What if this happens? What if that happens? Let me replay what happened, 2 years ago in my head for the 7,000th time. In the end, running from that is not the way to solve the problem. So how do we deal with that? We get resigned to learning through experience that just because you think a thing doesn't mean you have to act on the thought. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean the thought will come true. Just because you fear a thought doesn't mean the thought can harm you. And the way to learn those things is through the experience of allowing yourself to feel the thoughts, to experience the thought. Like, that's how we do that. So when you say, but how am I supposed to sit with my thoughts? How can I possibly do that? It's the only way to do it. It's the only way to do it. First, you're going to have to resign yourself to those truths that even though you think that your intrusive thought or your scary thought or your worrying or perfectionism or overthinking is special, different than everybody else's, but you want to respond to me with but my thoughts, but what about these thoughts? They're all the same. Your thoughts are the same as mine and everybody else's. So you start from that premise and that they are generally irrelevant. They come from inside you. And therefore, in the end, you still are driving the car. You just don't think you are. And so you resign yourself to the fact that the way to get past being terrified of sitting still and quiet with yourself is to sit still and be quiet with yourself. You're terrified of having that experience. And the only way to not be terrified is to actually learn to have the experience that you are so dreading. And learning that, like, well, I could think this all I want, but just because I think a thing doesn't make it true. My thoughts are not creating, predicting, changing reality in any way. My thoughts aren't keeping me safe. My thoughts aren't changing the past. And so I'm allowed to think. My brain is going to produce thoughts. I just do not have to engage with them. So what are the mechanics of that? The mechanics of that are the same as they are in a way with the physical sensations. You just have to learn to not engage with them. So when you sit quietly and the thought creeps in, what if I never get better? What if I never get better? What if this doesn't work for me? What if I never get better? Your job is to not argue with it, to not, try to prove it wrong, not rationalize it, not drown it out, not run to the, your favorite Facebook group or your friend or somebody for reassurance. That isn't going to happen, is it? Because no amount of reassurance will ever be the same. You just have to be resigned to the fact that right now I'm going to sit here and I'm going to have the thought, what if I never get better? Or what if I lose my job? Or what if my wife leaves me? Or all of these, whatever the thoughts are that you're worried about. What if nobody likes me? Whatever the thoughts are, you have to be resigned to, like, well, I'm going to have to just let those thoughts come. It just doesn't mean I have to engage in a conversation with them, because that's giving them the power that they don't want. So I don't want to veer off too much into the, the mechanics of how we deal with our thoughts. I've talked about that a zillion times in different episodes and on social media all the time. But the mechanics of learning to sit quietly is that we do it like we would approach any other task in recovery. We do it systematically and incrementally. So I'm not telling you to cancel your schedule for the next 2 weeks and do nothing but sit on your sofa in the dark and dead silence. I'm not telling you to do that. You're still going to live your life. And life, by virtue of it's just the activity we engage in, absolutely a distraction. Like life is a distraction. We go on autopilot. That's normal. That's okay. So I don't want you to worry that like, well, what if I go and do a thing? Well, if you have to go do a thing, go do a thing. You have to go to work, go to work. Like engage with the world, engage with your work. That's okay. That's not avoidance. Like that's just living your life. So you'll have to live your life, which is fine. And what I would say in terms of the sitting down and being quiet is this becomes part of your new exposure plan. And I don't care if you have to start with doing it 30 seconds at a time. That counts. If you avoid sitting quietly for ever, you just can't ever do it, then it's perfectly acceptable to just start by doing that for, 30 seconds at a time, 5 or 6 times a day. That's okay. That's okay. So you're going to sit, you're going to relax your body. You're going to breathe the way, we know how to breathe into our bellies, not into our chests and our shoulders. And we're just going to let the symptoms be there. And we're going to let the thoughts be there for 30 seconds. Set a timer on your phone or your watch, whatever it is. At the end of 30 seconds, get up and go do your thing. An hour or two later, come back and do it again for another 30 seconds. You will be super uncomfortable when you do that. You will be super uncomfortable when you just turn off all the sound and allow yourself to sit silently. And I do mean silently. In this situation, this is why sometimes I talk about guided meditation is not the best idea, because guided meditation can be a distraction. I talked about that at the beginning of the episode. So the mechanics of this, essentially, whether you're dealing with physical sensations or thoughts that come about when you sit quietly, is you're going to schedule time to do that. And if you have to start doing it 30 seconds at a time, then you'll start doing it 30 seconds at a time. And you will fail sometimes. You will be bad at this. But this is the basis sometimes of the meditation skill and the focus skill that I talk about all the time. You building the ability to sit there and say, hey, I'm going to sit here for 30 seconds and let whatever thoughts come and go. I'm going to have the thoughts. I'm just going to bring my focus back to where I want it, my breath or whatever, some point on the wall. Selective focus. And then you will, as 30 seconds is very short, so you don't have time to have your mind wander that much. But when you're doing it for 4, 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a time, you'll wander. You get caught up in your thoughts sometimes, but that's okay. The object of the game is, I'm thinking, holy cow, I just spent the last 3 or 4 minutes. I don't even know how long. Engage with my thoughts again. I'm thinking, I'm engaging with my thoughts. It's okay. It's okay to fail. So it's practice, 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 practice. Even the best meditators, if you will, struggle. Even people who've been doing it every day for hours and hours and hours, and have thousands of hours of experience under their belts, find that they struggle with it sometimes. Their thoughts take hold, or whether they're thinking about the grocery list or an upcoming vacation or an argument they had with their partner, whatever it is, like we think, and then we get engaged and we wind up in an inner dialogue when we're supposed to be trying to clear our minds or not engage with our thoughts. So it's okay to fail when you do it, because you're going to suck at it in the beginning and it will make you uncomfortable. But in the end, the object of the game here is, how do I learn to sit quietly with myself? How do I learn to sit still? 30 seconds at a time. Repeat as often as possible. That's how you learn to do this. Just like we learn to do everything else. That's how you learn how to drive away. If you're afraid of driving, it's how you learn to be alone in the house. If you have monophobia, it's how you learn to go to a restaurant. It's how you learn to talk on the phone. Any of the things that you're afraid of, we do it systematically and incrementally in a planned way. And I know that sounds crazy, like really dry, mechanical, and uninteresting, but that is the way you do it. So you start by, doing 30 seconds at a time on the sofa or in your bedroom or wherever in your backyard. It doesn't matter where you choose to do it, just in silence, please. I mean, you can't totally drown out the world, but do not intentionally stick sound in your ears, because that's a distraction tool. So you're going to have to learn to sit silently for 30 seconds at a time. And if you bolt at the end of the 30 seconds, it doesn't matter. You made the 30 seconds. You did it. You did it. And then the next time you do it again, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, you'll get good at 30 seconds pretty quickly, and then move it up to 60 seconds. And when you get good at that, move it up to 2 minutes. And when you get good at that, move it up to 5 minutes. And when you get good at that, move it up to 10 minutes. When you get to the point where you could literally sit in silence and do nothing but breathe, and some days you're really good at it, and some days you suck at it. It's normal. When you could do that for 15, 20 minutes at a time, and you want to start to add things like music, relaxing music and things like that, knock yourself out, because now you've built a new tool. You don't need the music anymore to distract yourself, or the imagery or the guided meditation. Then add it back in, knock yourself out. But you built the core skill. And suddenly you learn that, like, hey, I could sit quietly. And if I could sit quietly for 15 or 20 minutes, I could sit quietly for an hour or 2 hours and watch a movie. Or I could sit quietly and actually read a book that I want to read for 40 minutes before I fall asleep at night. Like, you'll build the skill of being able to sit quietly and understand that you can navigate your own thoughts, your own body, your own emotions. So first we learn to not call them disasters by disengaging with them. And then we learn that, hey, we are actually able to navigate them. Now you can actually work with your emotions and your thoughts. You can make your plans. You can build your models in your head, but you can do it without declaring the state of thinking or feeling a 5-alarm fire. So first we have to turn those acts into normal things that people do. Right now for you, it's a disaster. It's like the juggernaut. You know, you have to, it's like running a gauntlet of disaster. And so we have to learn that thinking and feeling in silence and being alone with yourself is not a disaster. And then when you know that it's not, now you could start to learn to do those things productively. So you see how there's an incremental and systematic way to do this. You start small, you get bigger and bigger and bigger, and now you start to add in, you know, nuances and additions and tasks that you can put on top of your sitting quietly. And you learn to do it productively. And when you lose the fear of sitting quietly with yourself, you have come a very long way toward addressing the one fear that drives so many of these disorders. So whether your problem is primarily sitting quietly or your problem is primarily being out and about, being afraid to leave your quiet, safe place, when you learn to sit quietly with yourself, you are going to improve your performance in almost every area. That's just the way that's going to work. So there you go. 26 minutes on this topic. I think that's probably more than enough. So I'm going to give you a little Ben Drake, as I always do. That's the end of the episode. Let's start that up, and you guys kind of fade it in slowly here. That's Ben Drake. The song's called Afterglow, which he actually kind of wrote based a little bit on some of the conversations evidently he and I had that I did not even remember that we had. But if you want to find Ben and Afterglow, go to facebook.com/Ben Drake Music. If you are listening to the podcast on iTunes or someplace where you can rate and review it, take a moment and do that, because it helps other people find the podcast, which means more people get the help, which is why I do this. Questions and comments, always welcome. However way you can get them to me, I will do my best. TheAnxiousTruth.com/links is all my social media presence and the Facebook group and all that stuff. Join if you're not in there. I appreciate you guys spending time with me. I will see you again next week.
It's in the afterglow. It's in the lyrics of the songs we know. It's in these feelings that you never show. Yeah, you're doing fine. It's all around you.